in here, hopefully. There it is. And we'll start from here. Very good. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about inspiration. I've been trying to inspire myself for a long time, to include getting up today, during the COVID. And it's really not making fun of it, but it is a tough time for all of us to have some sort of reason to go out and take pictures, I think. And I hope that tonight will be some fun. And I encourage everyone to kind of think about your own inspiration and what gets you going and what gets you taking pictures. And as I say here, get your butt off the couch, have some fun, and start. So we're going to jump into this, and I'll follow along with these slides. I want to thank, first of all, the club for this opportunity. I think we should be doing more of this, and especially to Hylos and Umit and the others behind the scene that can make it happen. That's important. In all honesty, I was amazed about how many responses I got when I put out an email asking for folks to submit their signature inspiration, if you will, and in the images to support those. And I think we had about 1/3 of our membership do it. So thank you. And finally, the bottom one there, if you can see it, to the Disney Group and ABC Network for relinquishing the airtime tonight from all the previews and all the hubbubaloo about the season finale of The Bachelor. Okay, so I know my wife is waiting for that right now. Okay, so I'm going to be your Chief Encouragement Officer tonight. And like I said a moment ago, I've had the outstanding assistance of about 12 folks from the club here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And tonight we'll be looking at not only their images, but also what inspires these people. And I hope that you can get something out of this, and perhaps there's something that you can also contribute in the way of what inspires you. So what we're going to do, following that old adage about tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And I put the caveat in there, maybe if I can remember what I told you. So, and let's not forget questions, comments, and complaints. And Pat Fahey is hereby nominated and accepted the nomination for Chief Complaint Officer tonight. Are you with me, Pat? And yes, we are going to try a little short intermission for a few minutes there to get your favorite refreshment or whatever it is you want about halfway through the presentation. So here's where I start. Back in the day, my grandmother, who did most of the photography for the family, had this Kodak Pony 135 rangefinder camera. Some of you know what a rangefinder is. Today, they're mirrorless. Well, actually, this one is a mirrorless camera too, if you think about it. That little thing that looks like a viewfinder was nothing more than a peephole. And I did not own a camera growing up, nor did I own one until my wife and I were married. But shortly after we were married, I got a draft notice. This was during the Vietnam period. And I was not real happy about that, but I knew that I'd be having to serve at least 2 years or more. As it ended up, I didn't find my way out until 26 years later. So, but my first camera really was this one right here from my grandmother. It shoots 35 millimeter film, which in those days she was using Kodachrome, which is a beautiful film. Those of you who know about it, it's probably the most color intensive film ever produced. And it was slide film, transparency, if you will. So you could take some pretty good pictures. I really didn't know much about this camera. I had to kind of learn as I went along with adjusting for the range. That's why it's called a rangefinder. You have a little dial on it, and you kind of guesstimate how far you are with your camera from the subject. And you just turn that dial, and hopefully it'll come out okay. So as I mentioned, I got drafted in the Army, and that kind of changed my life around a little bit, but it really began my love for photography in some ways. And what you're going to see in the next few minutes are maybe not so good things, but it did force me sort of to get into photography, if you will, and learn how to use a camera and take purposeful pictures, and you'll see why in just a minute. So we'll jump into that. So one of the first deployments I had in the Army was to Korea. And the way that happened, I was actually being assigned to a Special Forces, a Green Beret unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we were getting ready to deploy to Vietnam. And this was after I finished about 8 months in the Army Intelligence School, which then was at Fort Holabird, Maryland. So the reason why I have this picture here is because this is where it sort of all started for me. Unbeknownst to me, it started in terms of having to use a camera and learn how to use a camera. So I was an intelligence officer, and as I say, on my way to Vietnam to join a unit over there, Special Forces unit. But in January of 1968, some of you are way, way too young, or maybe not even born yet. Some pretty bad things happened in Korea. One, the incident that's kind of started everything was the capture of the U.S. Navy ship Pueblo, commanded by Commander Lloyd Booker and his crew in the Sea of Japan. The North Koreans commandeered the ship for threat of blowing them out of the water. They didn't have the armament to fight back. So Commander Booker had to surrender the ship, which was pretty controversial at the time. About that same time, there was an incident in South Korea called the Blue House Bandit Raid, where commandos from North Korea made it all the way to Seoul. When I say all the way to Seoul, from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, to the outskirts of Seoul is about 35 miles. So it's not a long distance. But they got there, they got around where the President Park Chung-hee and his cabinet were, what they call the Blue House, which is up on a hill, one of the hills in Seoul, and tried to, their object was to assassinate him and take over the government. And then along came an uptick in the number of hostile incidents up along the DMZ. The DMZ is about 160 miles from east to west. The terrain is very rugged. Back in those days, it was pretty primitive. The roads are all dirt and mud roads, and it's not a very pretty place, especially compared to today. But anyway, my unit, an intelligence unit supporting the military along the DMZ there, we were responsible for investigating and documenting the hostile activities of the North Koreans coming across the DMZ. They would come across usually in maybe 2 or 3 at a time, maybe even one. They were basically trying to get into South Korea to cause havoc. Most of them, and some of them were on their way there to hopefully become a spy for North Korea. A lot of them carried real, honest to goodness American greenbacks with them. And so the source of that was always questionable. But I remember one incident we had, an individual came across that had about $10,000 American cash in his backpack. And the idea was that he maybe could buy some cooperation from the South Koreans, who, most of you may know this, were extremely, very avid anti-communists. They just hated communism. So here I am, 24, 25 years old in this hostile land with a mission of that they gave me, which was to take pictures of not just the equipment, as this picture shows, weapons, whatever, but also to investigate the firefights going on. And I'd say 95% of the time, the North Koreans were killed either in the DMZ or just on the southern side of it by the South Koreans. So a few escaped. A few, actually, very few were captured as prisoners because they knew that the political conditions at the time were such that to be captured would be a lot worse than being killed. So a lot of them would hold a hand grenade to their forehead and blow their head off. Unfortunately, a lot of my pictures that I took at that time were of dead bodies. So that was not very inspiring, but it was part of my job. As I mentioned, the DMZ is divided by or contains it's about 2.5 miles from north to south. And over in the northwest corner, pardon me, is the Imjin River, which flows from North Korea into South Korea. And so it acted as a good means of infiltration by some of the North Korean commandos and spies. And this is just a picture that I took of a raft after the 2 occupants were killed by the South Koreans. So my job at that time, and this is where I get around to inspiration in photography, was, as stated here, investigate, take photographs, which we took a lot of photographs, myself and my team, and interview key witnesses where possible. And then we'd have to report the details in more like reports and all. And then finally, there's the, in red, you see my inspiration. My inspiration was not to get shot. Pretty simple. So moving from there, and with my grandmother's Pony 135 camera and some slide film, when I could, I would take some pictures that were a little bit better, for me at least, more inspiring anyway, of the surrounding places that I would go and the villages. And I love the kids. I'll still love kids. And, you know, anywhere you go, they're attracted to, if you have a camera, they're attracted to it. So it was a lot of fun sometimes to take pictures of the kids, and certainly a relief from the other dirty part that I had to do. So we're going to jump into the photos now that are submitted by your fellow members. And Tim Wolf, we lead it off with Tim's great shot here of Beale Street in Memphis. And what I've done here in the next 20 slides or so, you'll see the pictures, and then I ask everyone to submit to me or to write a few sentences or a few words about what inspires them. And so what you're going to be seeing from here on is some information, and I think we can all have fun with this and share it and learn from it and realize that, yeah, these are the things we like to do. And I'm sure all of you have your own inspiration that you could talk about, but these are just a few. So we'll go through and talk about these. So Tim took this, like I say, in Beale Street, and it speaks a lot. There's a lot going on there. I mean, it's great inspiration. You could stand there probably for several hours and get some great shots from that location. Here's Phyllis Westland. And I did not know this about Phyllis. Maybe some of you did, but the fact that she had 4 brothers and they'd all go to the barber shop together, and she liked to sit there and watch the barber cut their hair. And now she enjoys doing the same thing, and I guess anybody that's in the barber chair taking a picture. So that's a fun thing. Those are stories, and we all can be inspired by stories. So it's fun to see that kind of thing. Here's Rick Olson. Rick, if you're with us tonight, and I think you are, the presentation you gave a month or so ago was outstanding, where you talked about your photography of waterfalls, and this is just another great example of that. Rick has got some great compositions here. He mentions in this piece, dramatic or dreamy or both, one extreme or the other or both, and just a great picture. I love waterfalls myself, and there's certainly we're blessed here in Georgia to have not a huge number, but enough to get around, especially in North Georgia, enough to get around and see and try. So here's another one of Rick's of the Milky Way. This is just beautiful, taken from Nutley Lake. And, it's hard to find a dark place. You think about that. There's very little area around Atlanta proper that you can find a dark sky. So you really have to get out and find some place where you don't have the ambient light around you and artificial light and so on and so forth. But very inspiring to be able to do that for sure. Here we have Marianne Ortiz, and just reading her material that she sent with this picture, she does a lot of creative memory work, and this is one that, again, evokes a lot of inspiration to be able to see all that moving water coming over the dam and rushing down into the river and so on and so forth. Great picture, and Marianne, I'm sure, has got a lot of these kind of pictures with the work that she does. Gary Fader, very simple. He does a lot of traveling, he and his wife, and he says this scene like this inspires him. And I'm inspired just looking at it. My gosh, I'm not sure where it is, but it's beautiful. Love the scenery, love the snow-capped mountains there and the ice falls and whatnot. And that lake is just, you could almost like you want to skip a rock in there and make some water move. It's beautiful, but great inspiration there. Great inspiration. And here's Rob Herman. Rob and his wife, they do some significant traveling around, and I think Rob is a real avid swimmer, so I know that just about any picture he takes is going to be around water. And that's kind of a consistent theme for a lot of people, including myself. I mean, I love it when I can get to the shore or get out to a lake or river or whatever and include that in the scene. This is really, really great sunset picture. And Rob here talks about the fact that he can look at a photograph and return his state of mind to calmness by doing so. I love the contrast of colors here, the water, the sky, and of course the red in the foreground with the boats. That's very inspiring. To be able to capture that like that is really great. Nice, very nice work. Very inspirational, and one of his favorite locations. Here's Angie. Angie has got this great shadow shot. I mean, there's a story there, and the picture really, I think, draws you in. So inspirational, from the standpoint of inspiration, you can get a lot out of this picture. And again, I love that shadow. That speaks a lot. Very, very nice. Jeff is right in there with this anvil and hammer. Really great shot. And as Jeff says, his greatest inspiration is light. And you can tell that right off the bat here with the reflection on the anvil and the hammer and the stand of the anvil. It's beautiful, beautiful work. The coloring is great, very inspirational. Makes you want to try that shot yourself. And this is one I really love of Jeff's. Again, the play of light in here. And I keep thinking that, over on the far right, you see someone peering in, and then on the left, of course, Jeff, that almost looks like you're back there. I don't know, but that's such a compelling photograph because it really draws you in to figure out what's going on and where you are and so on and so forth. And of course the picture itself is just remarkably done. Play of light, very nice work. Another one of Jeff's here, and I'll tell you, to capture this backlit sunrise, sunset, whatever it is, with trees and everything, and that beautiful reflection on the ground. Um, just remarkable. Again, the play of light. You couldn't ask for more there. I mean, you have to study that a minute to realize that is in a lot of cases where you're working with the light is going to disappear pretty quickly. And so you've got to be ready with your camera to get that kind of shot, because it doesn't take very long for all that to disappear. Here's Demetria, the butterfly, and she has a nice, some nice text about what that butterfly means to her and the connection with her mom and dad who are since passed. And it's nice to be able to photograph something like that, because it makes it more real for you, to be able to do that, and very inspiring, very inspiring. Thank you for that great story that you sent. There's some great stories there, Demetria. Thank you. Here's Emerald Karpinski. I love trees. I mean, I can't imagine not taking pictures of trees. And the only challenge is when you get a really large tree, can you get it all in your viewfinder without other distractions coming into it? I know sometimes when you're in the city, or I can think of places out in the country where I've tried to get a picture. Oh, look at that beautiful tree. And you stop and try and get the angle of it, and you can never quite get the whole thing in. But even this shows some beautiful and remarkable work of nature, where the roots and everything are wrapped around, and you've got angles going in every direction. It's beautiful. And I love her saying about what inspires her, their ability to the trees' ability to communicate with one another, songs in the wind, fragrances, all the trees have that. And more importantly, like she says here, trees energize and makes her happy. And that alone is inspiration, because, if you're out there shooting trees, you can certainly be inspired what you see, no matter what time of year or day or whatever the light is. There's always something there to inspire you. Sally Hale, jogging along the Silver Comet Trail. Great pictures, great inspiration there. And, as Sally says, she's on that trail several times a week, I guess, running. And, not every day is going to be the same. Not just the weather change, but the atmospheric conditions, whatever, it's going to look different every day. And if you can capture something like this, it's a lot of fun, because it makes it different from maybe tomorrow or the day before or whatever. And it puts a new meaning on things to be able to do that. Okay, here's our illustrious president, Pat. And he's submitted several pictures here, and I've got, I think, 3 of his in the presentation here, and they're all great shots. I mean, just, Pat is one who really studies the subject and decides what he wants to do with it, and he does it. And so the inspiration here is the subject matter, I think, and he's done a great job doing that. And one of my favorites here, his mother-in-law, 95. I mean, come on. She's great looking. She had any marriage proposals, Pat?
No, her husband died about 8 years ago, and
Okay.
Seth was perfectly happy, making the rest of the family happy.
Okay. Well, that's a great portrait there. And, people, when you're taking people pictures, you can't help but be inspired. I mean, you talk to them and get to know your subject a little bit, and you realize, hey, I think I can work with this subject and make this person look great, or capture their innocence or their mood or whatever it might be. So it's an inspiration to be able to do that. And Pat, this is one I really like, because when you start looking at images and realize you've got the tools of all those filters that you can add. Some people don't like to do that, but I think that this is really a magnificent transformation of what I guess was your original photo of using the oil paint filter in Photoshop to be able to do that. So more of us maybe should be inspired to try those filters out. I rarely use them, but I like the effect. So it's something that I think you can get inspired about for sure. So thank you. It was great. Okay, so we're going to take about a 5 or 6 minute intermission, a pause here. And again,
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't know.
That's all right.
Flies
That's
when
okay.
you're having fun.
That's okay. No problem. All right. So we're going to talk a few minutes about finding your inspiration. And obviously, a lot of you have already found your inspiration, but maybe I can offer, and maybe some of the others here tonight can offer some other ideas. These are just a few that were right off the top of my head that I have got some examples of and for. So the first one there is books. I mean, my gosh, where do you start with books? Library? No. There are books on photography, books on documentary, whatever. There's one that I mentioned here on the slide that I really love, that if you have a few minutes sometime, you may want to Google it. The book is called That Tree, and it has to stand out as one of my all-time favorites as far as a photography book. And the book is about a photographer in Iowa a few years ago that had a nice little photo business going. I guess he's doing portraits and commercial work and whatnot. And a friend of his had a phone and said, you ought to be using your phone to take pictures. Why carry all that camera equipment around? And the photographer apparently said, well, a phone is never going to be as good as a real camera. But as you can imagine, he challenged the guy, and the photographer said, okay, I'll try taking a few pictures. So he's in rural Iowa, and every day he passed by a tree, one single tree, a lone tree out in the pasture, and he stopped one morning and took a picture of it. And he decided, well, his friend said, you just need to keep it up. So he decided he would take a picture every day for a whole year, 365 days of that tree in the pasture. And he did. And that's what the book is about. And it is a absolutely beautiful book, I have to tell you. And the interesting part of the story is that over a period of weeks and days and weeks and months, he was posting these pictures of this tree on Instagram and other social media, and had got a very large following of people that started saying, hey, that's pretty neat. And so everyone, I guess, kind of knew when his last day, the 365th day, would be up. And without him knowing it, about 200 people showed up at this pasture to watch him take his final picture of the tree. And I thought anyway, the book is really a lot of fun and documents that kind of thing. So that's just one very small example of some of the things that you can find to inspire you. And I was inspired by that. I thought, gee, that'd be fun to start taking a picture every day of the same thing, maybe. I don't know. If you're disciplined enough, I don't know. Magazines, of course, National Geographic. That's I mean, over the years, my mom and dad started subscribing to National Geographic when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I've kept up that tradition, and I still subscribe. And the magazine has changed dramatically over the years. They finally went digital from film in 2004, I think it was. But up until that time, many of you may already know this, they insisted that all of their images be shot with Kodachrome, Kodak Kodachrome 64 film transparency, because again, the Kodachrome was it was the pinnacle of color saturation and whatnot. So the colors, if you look back in some of the older issues before 2004, in that era, that part of the last decade of the 90s, and compare it today, you'll see the colors are still, back in the film days, brilliant. saturated colors. Newspaper articles. This is a fun thing to talk about because every day, if you look through the paper, my wife and I subscribe, and she reads it cover to cover. I just read the funnies and maybe a little bit of the sports page, but she reads the whole thing. And thanks to her, she has provided me some great inspiration and inspirational day trips, if you will, that have been reported in the AJC. Some event that's going on, some documentary, something that would get you out and get you going and check it out. And I've done that, and I've found some very fun stuff. And I've got a couple examples that you'll see in a few minutes of what was an article in the paper turned out to be a kind of a photo op for me. Media, of course, TV news, the same thing. Several of the stations now during the COVID period especially are having inspirational reports. And you can pick up a lot on that, especially interviewing people. And nothing wrong with going out and finding someone and interviewing them and photograph them, a story, create a story. Of course, we all love road trips and outings. That's something that I think is universal for photographers. Even during the pandemic, I've been able to get out. One of our members, Jim Moran, and I have been out several times this past year on short day type trips out. Even last year, right before the pandemic began, I try and lead a group down to the Georgia coast every year, about 5 or 6 people, and we had an outing, or we had a trip to the coast last year, early in March, just before the pandemic started. So we got that in. Unfortunately, that particular week, it rained every hour of every day. So we got a little wet, but we came back with some pictures. And of course, our club's photo challenges, weekly challenges, that's another inspirational thing. I mean, that alone can get you out and get you going. And then the last item here I have is volunteering. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, and I can tell you that they all can use your skills. I did I volunteered a couple of years ago for the Cobb Animal Shelter to do a calendar of dogs and cats. And so I was out there for several days in a row, and they would bring a dog out in the backfield for me. Then I'd take pictures, and we ended up with several hundred and skimmed it down to 12, about 6 dogs and 6 cats to go in a calendar, which they had printed and sold to as a money raising thing. But the nonprofits are out there. I've volunteered for about 2 decades with a couple military nonprofit groups, and been able to have some fun and really, and they appreciate that too, to take pictures of their events and give them some publicity and whatnot. So that's something I think that would inspire just about anybody. I've got a few examples here. Again, I'll talk about these. One of the things I really like to do are exhibits. I like to show my stuff, and I think most of you do too. And I had an experience that really, I'd say it was the capstone of the exhibits I put together, of my work anyway. It happened, it was actually, the genesis of it was a trip to New York City in August of 2001, okay? I'm sorry, yeah, 2001. And what happened was I was with was attending an arts conference there, and one particular day towards the end of the week, we took a arts tour with the Lower Manhattan cultural people, and we stopped at a couple museums and some galleries, and it was decided that we would end the tour at a studio that was on the 97th floor of the World Trade Center, North Tower. And so I had 2 cameras with me, film cameras. I had one of my cameras was loaded with infrared film, the other with color slide film. And I spent that late afternoon, was supposed to be a wine and cheese reception for the artists that were working there. I spent my time just taking pictures out these large windows from the 97th floor of the North Tower there. And here it was, 2 weeks later, 9/11 happens. 2 weeks later. And I was just, my gut hurt realizing what had happened, of course, and realizing I'd just been there 2 weeks before in that same place. And here I am with probably about 4 rolls of film that I had shot that day, wondering, what am I going to do with all this? And so it took a few years to kind of put all that together, but I did in the end decide I would put together an exhibit of the work that I'd done, shooting not just out the windows, but also around the Ground Zero area, World Trade Center area there of the lower Manhattan. And it was a very successful exhibit, and it was put on to mark the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And this year I'm considering, I'm not sure if it's going to be possible, I'm considering doing a kind of a 20-year reboot of that. But if you get the opportunity, go on my website, which is up there on the screen, and look for one of the albums called Towering Views, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The next item there is what I mentioned earlier a few minutes ago about Atlanta Journal articles about different things. My wife saw an article about a story about a man who was closing a recycling or junkyard site on Howell Mill Road on the west end of downtown. And his father apparently had owned the business for over 40 years, and his father just recently passed away. So the son had the job of kind of closing things up and selling off the property and all. So I went down there, and you'll see the pictures in a couple minutes. I've only got 2 or 3 that I'm going to show. But I ended up talking with this man. He was in his early 30s, I guess. Excuse me. And he was really, it was kind of a bittersweet time because he kind of grew up with his dad working there all those years. And he had one thing in particular you'll see in the picture when I show it, and that's this old tree that sat right in the middle of the junkyard, the recycling yard that he used to play on. So I ended up actually taking, probably spent most of the day there taking pictures of every angle I could of the property. And I put together like an album for him, and he really appreciated that because it was sort of a remembrance of his dad and how hard his dad worked in that particular business. So you'll see that in just a minute. Getting inspired to market and sell your work. That's a lot of fun. It takes some time, but you can do it. And I know that all of us in the Cobb Photo Society, everybody's got some work that they could probably sell if you take the time to go out and try and market that someplace. I have a couple examples. One would be fairly near where I live over here in Northeast Cobb, a place called Reveille Cafe on Shelford Road at Sandy Plains. It's in a Kroger shopping center there. It's a successful restaurant there. And before they opened, I contacted the owner, and I said, you probably would maybe be receptive to some nice photos for inside your cafe here, inside the restaurant. He said, yeah. I said, he said, that might be an idea. What do you think? And I said, well, reveille, meaning, from my military days, that's when you get up in the morning. That's the first thing you think about is reveille. So maybe something that would pertain to that. And he said, well, yeah, how about a sunrise around Kennesaw Mountain? He said, I'd love to have that if you could get pictures of that. So I said, okay, I'll take that on. And so for about 3 days in a row, I got up real early in the morning and dark and drove over to Kennesaw Mountain and found out very quickly the sun doesn't really rise there because it's black. It's blocked by the mountain. So it's about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning before the sun is actually up and over the mountain. So that that wasn't going to work. And I talked to the owner about that at the cafe, and he said, well, what else do you think? He said, I like sunrises. I said, well, I've got sunrise pictures of I took in Australia, New Zealand, and here in the States. So I showed him a few, and he bought into that idea. So I sold him several large canvas wraps to go in the restaurant there, and it worked out pretty well. And then I'll show you another one here, a company called Element Solutions, a local or company located their office here in Atlanta. It's over in Alpharetta. And we'll talk about, I'll show you a couple pictures there based upon the fact that one of the individuals, one of the managers of the company was at our Cobb Photo Society exhibit a couple of years ago. And I had a picture of a car, dream car I had taken, and he liked it so well. He said, that's what I like. The company, by the way, produces automotive finishes. Okay, so that's where the car is tied in. So that was the inspiration there. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the afterlife of your images. I've got a couple examples there. So let's take a look at what I got here. Okay, back to the Star Recycling Center. That's just the sign. It's on Hollow Mill Road, and the property has, I think, since been sold off, of course. And as any of you know who've been in that area, completely changed over from what it used to be, kind of the somewhat Atlanta industrial area now to high-rise office buildings, condos, restaurants, kind of the in place. Well, this was their main office building there. And just another picture. There's the tree I'm talking about. The man really loved that tree, and that was so important to him to have a picture of the tree. And I would guess that the tree has since been cut down, and there's probably a condo or something on that property now. But that's what inspired him to inspire me. Okay, so here's the company that produces one of their businesses to produce finishes on automobiles and automobile parts. So those pictures are the dream car pictures I took at the High Museum a few years back, actually 11 years back, I think. And I had one in one of our Cobb exhibits. The guy saw it and said, geez, I like that. Can you have any more? So I sold him the idea of producing a wall of these. They're 20 by 30 inch aluminum prints, and they do well in that space there. There's a longer shot of the kind of common area in their office. So that's just an inspiring thing you can do. You can take your pictures, and if you have the time and the wherewithal, you can go and market them to, stores, restaurants, hospitals, office buildings, you name it. The market is there. It's just a matter of getting out. And I know that what I ran into and have run into for a long time, many years, is that a lot of these interior designers will deal with a large company, and they buy these things wholesale from who knows where. So your competition is pretty stiff for that. But if you can show something different, because a lot of the stuff that is kind of out there that these large companies do in quantities, they're not very unique photos. They're nice, but nothing unique and nothing that would relate to maybe the company or the organization that they're willing to buy them for their space. Okay, so in the 70s, as kind of a hobby, I took up drawing and painting watercolors. And at the Atlanta College of Art, this is something I think is interesting because I find the same thing happens now in carrying my camera around. Photoshopping your brain, that is, with your brain, use your brain to Photoshop. So this instructor at the Atlanta College of Art taught the process that you can take your camera, go out, you view your subject from different angles And we all do that with our camera. Take several photographs. And then for an artist, sketch from your photograph. And then when you're done with that sketch, put away the photograph and paint from your sketch. And the idea being, the principle behind it is that our brains begin to Photoshop out that which is not important, okay? So I've taken plenty of photos over the years and ended up with seeing a telephone pole or wires or a stop sign in the picture, and I don't remember that when I'm looking through my viewfinder. It's because your brain has already photoshopped that out. If it's something that's inspired you, you're not looking at that. You're looking at what you see through the viewfinder, what you think you see. And so, following this process and using your camera in that process, you can do a lot of, you can find a lot of inspiration. Here's an example, okay? Again, not too far from where I live. The old Gordy property, if anybody knows the name Frank Gordy and the Gordy family here in Cobb County, owned a heck of a lot of land out here where I live in the northeast end of the county. Frank Gordy, by the way, his family is the founders of the Varsity, okay? And Gordy Tire and so on and so forth. So they were prominent in Atlanta, and I guess still are to some degree. But anyway, they had a lot of property out here. And not too far from me was this old building or shack sitting there. And I took some pictures. And by the way, this is now where the first Publix built outside the state of Florida sits, on this same piece of property here at the corner of Shalford Road and Sandy Plains Road. It's a Home Depot in the shopping center. And exactly where that building was is now a Wells Fargo bank in front of the Publix there. So I took that for the purpose of painting something. And so that's what I ended up with. I used a little artistic license, but you can see I kept the Royal Crown Cola sign. And I just did that. And what I found was over the years, I ended up with my little hobby that I had going there. I ended up in about a 10-year period from probably the early 70s to the early 80s. I painted maybe 80 watercolors and a few drawings. And I sold all but about 4 of them in art shows and exhibits and stuff like that. And I look back, and thankfully I took a slide or a photo of every one that I ever did before I sold it. But this is one of only about 4 that I have left of the ones I sold. And one of them I had asked Chandler about earlier was another inspiration from a photograph. I used to go around and I love photographing, still do, historic buildings and old barns and all. I guess that comes from growing up in a rural area of Ohio that had a lot of barns and all. And I love old buildings and the architecture that goes into that. So this is the old AME church that sat facing the square on Waddell Street. The property, as I recall, was purchased by Cobb Federal Savings and Loan. And they built a large bank building, about a 4-story bank building on that property, and then later sold it to Cobb County for a government building which faces the square there. But the AME church is still active, and they're now, I think it's called the Turner Chapel. I'm not sure, but it's up on the North Loop there near 41 and Highway 120. But that's just, again, the inspiration of your photography can create a lot of those things. Okay, the afterlife of your images. And this is something that everybody should think about. There's probably, for all of you, there's probably at least 1 or more pictures that you've taken over a period of time that you keep kind of going back to. And this is one of mine that I keep going back to. I started photographing this building. This is an infrared photograph, by the way. I started photographing this building probably in the early to mid 70s. It's located in a town called Gardy, G-A-R-D-I, Gardy, Georgia, on main highway going to the coast, just before you get to Brunswick, okay? And the building really hasn't changed over the years, but it's brought back a lot of stories. And interestingly enough, for whatever reason, I don't know how this speaks to a lot of people, but I have sold more of this particular print than any other photo I've ever taken over the years, probably half a dozen or more framed photos. This is what the building actually looks like in color. Uh, and the building really hasn't changed much at all in that time. In fact, one of these pictures, I'm not sure if it's this one, but I just took in last year, 2020. So it's the same building. The building was once, it's got some history to it. I met a few years ago, I searched out the owner, and he lives in a house kind of on a street behind the highway there. His dad was the one who started I think a hardware store, and then the building became a local post office, a rural post office. And then his dad, I guess after his dad built it, he started up an apiary selling honey, and it still sits. And I don't know the original date of the building. I'm guessing it's probably the early 1900s anyway, from the looks of the architecture. But the funny story that goes along with this is that when this image was, this particular one was in an exhibit, not long after the exhibit, I got a call from a woman who right away said, "I just loved your image of fancy honey. I'd like to buy it." And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. I can sell you a copy of that. That's not a problem." "No, not your photograph. I want to buy the building." And it turns out her name was Honey, and she was known as Fancy Honey. And she was determined to buy that building. Now, I don't know how far she got along with it, but as of last year, the building is still standing there as you see it. But that was kind of a fun thing to hear from somebody who really got into that. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, I want to show you a quote that I love. This is from this month's issue of National Geographic, the editor, Susan Goldberg. And as we talked about before, there's so many great stories that are documented in every issue of National Geographic, but this is one that, this is a little article that she had up in the front of the magazine. And it really, I think, hits home that even in the streaming media age, still photos can reveal indelibly powerful stories. And so I would ask you, what will be your inspiring story? And I want to take some, I want to open up to questions and comments and whatever, but think about that. And maybe if not tonight, we can talk about it sometime.
Well, David, thank you. That was fantastic.
Enjoyed it, David. I wanted to mention the Kodak Pony 135. That was my second camera.
Okay.
And when I was in basic training, there was a guy that needed some money, and he wanted to take a weekend pass.
Uh-huh.
And so I traded him that and $20 for a Leica 3F.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
Well, I don't think I mentioned that the first camera the first 35 millimeter SLR that I used in the Army was military property. It was a Leica I think it was an R3. This is like 1968, 69. It was an R3. I had no idea what it was. I mean, someone gave me about a 10-minute instruction how to load the film and where the shutter button was, and that's about all I knew about it, And come to find out, that camera was a real gem, had that 50 millimeter 1.4 lens on it, and I didn't realize at the time what I was holding and using, But I say the nice thing. I don't know whether it was a nice thing, but the nice thing about one of the good benefits, if you will, of those days in Southeast Asia, both in Vietnam and Korea, you could, through the PX system, you could get a pretty good deal on Canon and Nikons and some of the other cameras. And very often, like the first SLR I actually bought, I bought it from a guy who bought a Pentax Spotmatic over there. And he used it for a while and then decided he wanted a Canon camera. So I bought his used Pentax. And I had that camera for about 15 years. So before I went to Nikon. But anyway, readily available back then. So yeah, good.
But at least when you were in service, you were past the speed graphic era.
Well, actually, no, that is not true. The photography in the Army is the territory for the Army Signal Corps, okay? And the photos that were taken, that I took with very often on these missions that we were on the DMZ, if it were safe enough, this local Signal Corps unit would send a photographer with me, and he used a speed graphic. And so, you know, here I was with a little 35 millimeter SLR, and this guy's got this big speed graphic, but they had the developing right, I mean, not the rights, but they had the developing equipment at the unit that they could, you know, turn those photos around in a matter of hours. Yeah, but a speed graphic was kind of a stable item in those days.
Yeah, I thought I'd mention something, David. When it comes to inspiration, another thing that can work is just forcing yourself to do something a little outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure.
There's an ancient trick that schools would use with a photographer, and it's one example of it, but grab a 50 millimeter prime and nothing else, and go shoot whatever the topic du jour is going to be, you know.
Yeah.
I mentioned my last trip, Pat, to Okar City that we were talking about last week. I shot all day with a 105 millimeter macro lens. That's the only lens I used.
Yeah, yeah.
And not all of the shots were macro shots, but that was the lens that I had with me that I wanted
Sure.
to use.
Yeah.
And I found some things that I might not have, you know, seen any other way, except that I was forced into that sort of box of using that particular equipment. So I think sometimes a limitation can actually result in the opposite. Right?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting too, but because I never really knew enough about lenses when I was in Korea to really know that there was a difference. All I knew was that 50 millimeter, you know. So you work with what you have. But yeah, and the 105, Rick, is a great lens. I've got an old Nikon 105 macro or micro lens, I guess Nikon calls it, and it's a gem. It's great. Any other comments or questions or stories? Well, again, thank you everybody for zooming in tonight, and I hope that we can all get out there and make some inspiring stories.
And
Thank you.
David, on behalf of the club, I really want to thank you for your presentation. I think all of us go through dry spells, and I think just kind of watching this, realize that when you talked about the story about the tree, it reminded me of Marianne's little thing she said where she was trying to take the same scene overseas, and I think that's a great photo project if you're in the mood.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a plug for Mark's weekly photo challenge, though.
Yeah, for sure.
If you kind of think about it, what we're saying is here's a chance for you to go through your old libraries and look for photos that kind of worked, or what we would really hope you to do is grab your camera and go outside and shoot. For an example, this week it's glass. Last week, Mark, I think it was trees, if I'm not mistaken. And I was really inspired by some of the tree photos that suddenly appeared on the page. It was nice. So I think the Facebook Weekly Photo Challenge is a great inspiration tool. And it's also a great chance for you to show your work amongst your fellow club members and get some tips or some friendly pats on the back as well. And I just think it's good. If I can, Umit, I'm sorry I missed you earlier. Would
No,
you
no
like to share
problem at
anything?
all. No problem at all. We have Pat's class coming up, starting on the 22nd. And those lucky 6 of you who got in onto that class,